Decided to change myself, so to put some yellow clothes on me. So we will speak today with Fiona Smith, the manager on international development of Open Data Institute from the UK, about why we need open data and what we can get out of it. What can the city get, the NGO, the country get out of open data, and all of the community. And so we decided that we'll have such a structured conversation, but of course we are ready for the questions. If any of the questions emerge, please raise your hands. And we're having Alessia here. Alessia, where are you? Which will help us with the microphones. So, for 7 hours already. For 7 hours, we're speaking about open data. Maybe everybody already remembered what that is, so I'd like to ask Fiona, what are your impressions of this event, of what you heard here about the speeches, about the stories, and about our presentations? Is there the perspective for Ukraine in the cities, in the businesses, experts, and community? Olesya will be with the microphone, so please raise your hands. And so far, please, Fiona.
Fantastic. First of all, I feel like I should correct one statement since we're talking so much about anti-corruption and fraud. I'm actually from Australia, not from Great Britain, so you'll have to forgive my accent. But really, it's my pleasure to be here today at Ukraine's very first Open Data Conference. I'm just so inspired every time I visit Ukraine and spend time in Kiev by all of the fantastic reformers I meet working in the public service, or the really passionate anti-corruption activists, but also by the very talented group of developers and startups, many of whom are here today. So overall, my impression is, wow, this ecosystem that you're building is just so dynamic, and you've really laid incredibly strong foundations to build a very successful open data initiative. And while I was listening to all the different presentations and talks today, I just noted down a few of the highlights of the real achievements that I've heard. And they include an additional 4 cities joining the Open Data Charter. In fact, just before this session, I saw that your Prime Minister had publicly congratulated the cities for joining the Charter on Facebook. So that's a really encouraging sign by how much high-level political support and goodwill there is for open data. We also heard about Ukraine rising over 20 places in the Open Data Barometer rankings, and that's in the space of 1 year, which is truly incredible. Yesterday, for those of you who are following the Open Government Partnership in New York, we heard about Ukraine being part of the Open Contracting 5, along with France, Colombia, UK and Mexico, which signals just how serious you're taking anti-corruption and open data. And finally, we heard about lots of innovations that are happening in the open data space, where applications and services are being built upon data releases. So I learnt about the beneficial ownership register and opening up e-declarations. So now we have a way of apparently screening our future spouses, amongst other things. So all in all, I think you're laying a very steady foundation. But I guess my one word of caution, and maybe we can discuss this a little bit further, is not to get complacent during this time. I found from my experience working in open data in various countries around the world, including places like Tanzania, Rwanda, Malaysia, Kenya, that the time to really, I guess, embed the reforms and plan for sustainability is now, when open data is on the rise, because you can't guarantee that the next administration will be as supportive of open data, or that the public spirit will continue to be so excited about open data when something new and shiny comes along. So that would be my one recommendation.
Так, насправді сталість процесу
Yeah, that's true. The sustainability of the process and the policies of the openness of the data is really a very important component for the open data to work and to have certain benefits for the society. So out of your experience of the work abroad, the work including the UK work, which is one of the leaders among the countries in the openness and usage of open data, what are the benefits of open data which can be got by the state, by the country as a whole, or maybe by separate city and the citizens? How can we achieve these benefits of the openness of data and usage of them?
That's a very big question. So I'm going to try and unpick it sort of piece by piece. Now, the first thing I would say is that you can think about data like a piece of infrastructure or a road. I've heard many references today about data being like oil, in the way that it fuels innovation and business growth. And while I agree with that part of the statement, I think open data is very different from oil in other ways. Because unlike oil, it's not non-renewable. So when someone uses a piece of open data, it's not preventing someone else over here from using it or reusing it again. It's also not a depleting resource. In fact, we're seeing the volume of open data grow and grow and grow. And also, hopefully, it's not doing as much damage to the environment. So the reason I refer to open data as being like infrastructure is because it needs to be planned, like a road system needs to be planned. It needs to be invested in. It needs to be maintained. And the more connections you make between roads, the more connections you make between data, the more value you keep generating for citizens. And when we talk about benefits, we can see that data helps people get to decisions, just like roads help people get to a destination. But we know, obviously, along that road, along the way, that we need intermediaries to help make sense of that data so that people, consumers, businesses can be able to use it. Data in and of itself, without some interpretation and understanding, as we know, won't get you very far. So a dynamic data infrastructure will comprise of the raw elements of data as well as all the different actors involved. They could be, journalists who are simplifying or interpreting the statistics and telling the stories with the data. Or it could be your coders who are building a new app on your mobile phone. So to really get the benefits of open data for a city or national government, we need all of these pieces to start to come together. And I've seen a lot of that already happening in the Ukraine here today, which is very exciting. And depending on your priorities or the problems you're trying to solve at the city or national level, those benefits can look quite different. I was listening to President Macron of France yesterday give his address to the OGP, and he sort of synthesized the main benefits of open data and the digital revolution in 4 components. So he said it produces more transparency, more efficiency, more accountability, but also, very important in these times, more trust. And for those of you here this morning, you would have heard of Lord Francis Maud share his experience in the UK. And he said that open data was really important to build citizen trust in the government and legitimacy. And at first it's hard. It's hard because it can expose things. It can make people feel uncomfortable. But if you're comfortable and brave to share where things are not going on track, then citizens have more reason to trust you when things are going well and your claim is a success. So I think those are the 4 key areas, as well as being a driver of new businesses and economic growth, as we've already been discussing today.
Дякую дуже. Я просто
Thank you so much. That's such a nice comparison with the roads, data with the roads. We know that the roads in Ukraine are so nice, really. So we know about the quality of local data, which is the same. So we have to work with infrastructure more and more. But still, we don't have to invent the new wheel because all of those wheels are already developed and used in other cities and other countries, and they're really well playing, well working. This is well functioning, the wheel, how to get maximum from the open data. Maybe you could share your experience about 3 or 4 examples of very motivating and inspiring for the representatives. I know there are representatives here of the local councils. Would you raise your hands? Who is from the city councils, from different cities of Ukraine? Yeah, I can see one hand only. Okay, at least. And who's from the business? Who are representatives of business? Okay. And from the government? The government listens us over there, right? Just to listen. And from the civil sector. Okay, so how can we get the maximum? Maybe you have certain ways how to do that. Any piece of advice, of the top 4 advice? Thank you.
Thank you. Again, another big question. So I might start off by telling a few stories, and then from that sort of extract some of the principles or sort of common steps that cities and countries have been taking to get value out of their data. Now, the first example that's often shared about the value you can get from cities publishing open data is Transport for London. So a few years ago, they decided to release as open data all the information about transport routes and timetables. And that produced value of $58 billion to the economy in terms of time saved by commuters to get to the destinations that they wanted to faster, because they could figure out the fastest route. So some of you, like me, might rely on apps like City Mapper to get around new cities, especially when I'm a tourist. So apps like that just wouldn't be possible if developers did not have access to that transportation data. However, that example can sometimes be a bit overwhelming, I think, for smaller cities or municipalities. So I like to to share maybe a few examples from smaller sort of cities or councils I've interacted with that show the benefits that can be brought to citizens' everyday life and interaction with services. So in Leeds, which is another town in the UK, it's a much smaller town than London, but it's in the north of the country. They've taken a really open, collaborative approach towards open data. So they've been publishing data from the city on a portal, but they're also allowing private sector and semi-private companies like utilities to publish data as well in the same place. So that allows developers to do a lot more things with the rich types of data available. And just a couple of examples of new apps that have been created from that. So one of them is called Leeds Bins. Now this was addressing a problem in waste management. So in an attempt to cut costs at the local level, the government made some changes to the waste collection times and routes, but weren't sort of updating citizens about these changes. So it resulted in loads and loads of complaints by homeowners, like not knowing when to put out their trash, by streets being littered, and they were using reporting apps. I'm not sure if you have them here in the Ukraine, but there are apps where you can, report if the street light's broken, etc. So the local council were fielding all of these, angry points of feedback from citizens. So what they did, they worked with some developers to share and kind of release the data about the waste collection routes. So now you can have a reminder set to your phone. So it's updated along with any changes. So whenever it's recycling day, for example. So that's a really, really small and I think replicable example about how open data can drive simple improvements. And I've seen similar approaches in other cities around the world, like Jakova. It's a very small municipality in Kosovo. So they've been mapping all the sites of illegal waste dumping around the city in an attempt to clean it up for children and families. And that resulted in 50 to 70% reduction of illegal waste dumping. Again, a really cheap, cost next to nothing solution to a real day-to-day problem. But then when we want to talk about the national level and how do you tackle sort of grand challenges like corruption, of course we have the shining example of Prozoro in the Ukraine, but there's also some really interesting things going on around open banking and e-commerce fraud in Mexico. There's a startup there called Bayonet, who are working with open banking data from the Bank of Mexico, along with data held in repositories of online consumer interactions, so that they can start to detect any instances of e-commerce fraud, which causes a lot of loss to businesses, especially small businesses who have online retail companies. So anyway, this startup is helping businesses of all kinds of sizes to make better, more secure decisions, and also avoid a lot of loss. So we can look at the very micro examples right out to the big. The second part of your question was how do we get there? And I think we've heard a lot of suggestions here today that I perhaps might not repeat around sort of what you can do technically to improve the data. So things like adopting common standards, such as the open contracting standard. There's a real need, I've heard from the city leaders, to work on improving the methodology of data collection and the quality of data that's actually going into the portals. There is a saying that you put rubbish in and you'll get rubbish out. So those are some sort of fundamentals. But beyond that, I think one of the most important things to work on is the culture transformation. Because if you're not tackling that, then all you'll get is a series of spreadsheets on the internet, basically, without really working on encouraging uptake, changing the mindset of data producers. You won't get to use, and without use, you won't get to impact. So around this issue of cultural transformation, about 2 years ago, I did some research speaking to 15 different open data leaders from around the world, just to try and understand what they were doing to be so successful. So it included countries like the UK, who at the time were leading the Open Data Barometer ranking, Canada, South Korea. And we discovered that despite the different contexts, there's actually a lot of similarity in the challenges that they were facing and the strategic approach that they were adopting. Just about all of them had an attitude of start with the quick wins, start small, to build momentum and show some success, but also have the long-term strategy, because there are bigger, more hairy problems that if you don't have a plan for fixing them, they could disrupt your entire initiative. For example, if you're not addressing the legislative environment, that might limit your ability to reach scale. So it's important to do those two things at the same time. The second thing I've seen, and I've seen here in the Ukraine as well, is aim for the highest level of political support you can get for the initiative. And it helps to have a champion right at the centre, or as close to the centre as possible. But beyond that, for open data to take hold and spread throughout different agencies, you need to build up a network of these open data champions who are embedded in different agencies, who have the ability to spread the message, but also support with the technical capacity to enable it to happen. And finally, another really important thing to do is to be building your external coalition of support. So events like this are a really, really great example of why it's important to be, reaching out, collaborating with open data users, listening to what their needs are, what data sets they want, what you can do to be improving the open data quality, but also to identify what projects you might do together, because I don't believe it's government's role to be the ones also building all the services and apps on top of the data. It requires people with fresh ideas, skills, talent, and the outside to be able to do that, which is why Prosoro is such an amazing example, and I talk about it all the time wherever I go, because it's so unique to have that level of cooperation. Yes, I'm really excited to see in the Ukraine what is the next Prosoro. Maybe one of the finalists here today is sitting on the next Prosoro idea.
Ну, я думаю, що всі ми хочемо почути якусь таку
I think that all of us want to hear such an initiative which would have such a state level support. But as Fiona said, let's listen to the use of the data. Please raise your hands if you have any questions. Feel free to ask, and then we'll. The microphone.
My name is Michael. I'm making my own business based on open data. And after all these 7 hours of the conference, I'm still focusing on it. Yeah, and my question is there any opportunities for Ukrainian companies to grow outside and become big, I think, global, this term, and is any, and how we can start, what's the, maybe your advice is how we can become the part of the European companies who working with open data, because most of the projects was presented today here is very local. We working with very specific data that it's probably will be absolutely different in the other country. And what you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good question. And to answer that, actually I want to refer back to Prosoro again as a good example of how it is possible to start with a pilot in a place like the Ukraine and to be able to package that up as a business model and then promote it to other jurisdictions. I know that there are a number of different countries who are interested in that type of business model that Prosoro is using. I've also seen something like Prosoro, which is called something different but quite similar in Nigeria. And similarly, that initiative is now spreading in several African states. So I have seen evidence of that happening. Of course, as you mentioned, there are contextual challenges because data systems in each country are still quite different. So you run into the challenge of interoperability at certain phases. And in terms of opportunities for expansion, there are, I know, a great range of incubators working across European levels. So one that the Open Data Institute has been involved in previously was called ODINE. So it's an incubator for data startups across Europe. So there are some initiatives like this happening at the sort of pan-European level which bring together startups from different countries to exchange lessons, but then also to connect with the wider community of investors to see how to kind of build and scale. But I think at the moment as a community, we don't quite have that understanding of what are the business models using open data that really work, and how do you scale them successfully. We have a few anecdotes like this, but maybe not a comprehensive understanding. So I think we need to do a little bit more research to know what are the different pricing models, for example, you can use. What are the different sort of services that you can bundle, and how do you market these? So yeah, I would encourage anyone who's sort of interested in this type of research, get in touch with me. I'm happy to kind of share some links and ideas. But yeah, I don't think we're there yet, but maybe others in the audience have some thoughts.
Наскільки я знаю, також Державне агентство
As far as I know, the state agency on e-governance in the roadmap of the development of the electronic portal, they said that the data will be on the European portal of open data and they will work in the interoperability, including the European data. So we have such an European interoperability framework, which I hope will where Ukraine will belong to. So the questions, please raise your hands. And so far, there are no questions. Just a second. I'll ask my own question and then yours, okay? So, just for us to be over with our thesis about the benefits, about the dignities of the open data, who can measure and how we can measure them? Why some countries, for instance, like the UK, it can be counted, the hours, for instance, and how can we done for Ukraine, for instance? How can we count this maximum of these benefits?
So measuring open data is actually a really complex area. So several economists have tried in the past to estimate what's the exact monetary value or GDP value of publishing more open data. And you might have heard of that amount from McKinsey stating it would add $3 trillion worth of value to the global economy each year. Personally, I feel that amount is perhaps a bit overblown. So at the Open Data Institute, we've been working with some economists at I'm going to forget the name, Access Economics? Anyway, we've been working with some economists to try and figure out a more accurate methodology for measuring the true value of open data. In the UK, their estimate came out at 0.5% GDP each year, which is about £2 billion worth, so it's quite a bit smaller. And they got to that amount by looking at things like sort of savings and cost efficiencies by better procurement practices, energy savings through use of sensors and smart technology, as well as new businesses, jobs created. The third thing that's quite hard to measure are the welfare benefits. And by that, I mean, what are the social and environmental impacts? I don't think we have kind of a formula for doing that yet, but I'm really excited about a piece of work that's coming up in the Ukraine really soon that's being spearheaded by the Kiev School of Economics. So they're taking this sort of methodology that's been trialed, but applying it to the Ukraine context. So they're going to be looking at things like how many new jobs will exist in what industries if more data is released into the economy. So that's going to be a really, really exciting piece of research, and I encourage everyone to watch this space. What's kind of quite difficult, there's been a lot of debates recently, is how do you measure the impact of releasing an individual data set. So I know some more sort of academic researchers in particular are coming up with methodologies for tracing the use of a data set once it's released. So looking at things like how many times is it cited in news articles or academic papers, looking at download figures and things like that. But personally, I feel that misses the point a little bit of open data. Because if we go back to our original statement of data being like infrastructure, such as electricity, we just all assume and accept that it has value to the population, that people benefit and thrive from it. So while I think it's really important to think about these big numbers and economic figures because we need to justify it to politicians, yeah, I also hope we reach a day where open data just becomes kind of boring because everyone accepts that it's just important and useful.
Ну, чекаємо на дослідження і методологію.
Yes, we are waiting for the research and methodology from the Kyiv School of Economy. And the last question is from Alina. Alina, Open Data Community Belarus.
Justine, you told about changing in minds of data producers. In our situation in Belarus, we have some political will, but at the same moment, besides of fear of openness, we see some lack of belief that it can be really successful for our situation. Maybe you have some practical advice how to push this mind changing.
Sure. No, thanks very much. That is a very common, unfortunately, problem that we see of sort of reluctance to release, either because there's a sense of fear driving that they'll be exposed or embarrassed because the quality of data is not good, or just that it creates some kind of hassle because it's sort of extra steps. So I think what can be helpful in that situation is speaking to the individual data producers and showing how it can help them do their jobs better. So what benefits it can bring to them. And we've got examples and even statistics from public servants to show that sometimes they're the highest consumers of their own government's open data. Because if you're sitting in the Ministry of Education, for example, sometimes you need that data set from Ministry of Finance, and you'll spend a long time running around the office, filing a request, chasing it down, when if it was just on an open data portal, like it would take that long. So sometimes it's about showing those, small benefits, improvements to the individuals. Other times, public scandals or shocks or stories can actually help motivate and inspire people into action. So that's where it can also be beneficial to be working closely, if you're an open data advocate, with journalists who can help to uncover some of those stories. And I guess the third thing is maybe pointing to international examples that might motivate, if that's something that they're sort of concerned about. So I know Ukraine was particularly motivated by, rising up the barometer rankings, and that really helped generate that kind of, initial push. And we've seen that when there are international commitments made and there's an active civil society, that can then help to ensure that there's some level of social accountability for those commitments. And in a paper that I'm about to put out soon, I've been looking at that very question of what happens when countries backslide from open data, when they start out and then they take steps back. Sometimes having some kind of law or directive can help at least make it harder to undo the change. So in summary, many different strategies. It will really depend on kind of what works, what motivates people within the government that you're working in.
Доріг багато, але ціль одна.
There are lots of roads, but I have one aim. Well, I'm sure that we're short of time. I can see that the judges have come back, so everybody wants to know who's the winner of Open Data Challenge. So I will steal 30 seconds more for Fiona to say a couple of sentences which would be motivating and inspiring for all of the participants and all of the participants of Open Data Challenge, Open Data Awards. Several motivating words.
I'll try my best. So firstly, I just wanted to congratulate really everyone here today. So the TAPAS team for organizing this fantastic event, for representatives of government who are producing data and making the difficult reforms, and also for all of the startups and teams here who are coming up with really innovative ideas. I think Ukraine has the potential to be a real trailblazer worldwide in open data, and you already are doing that. So my encouragement would be to keep it up, and as I opened with, lock in the reforms and build for sustainability now while the excitement is so high. And then I can only see you continuing to rise up the barometer rankings. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Дякую дуже, Фіона Сміт, менеджер.
Thank you, Fiona Smith, manager on the International Development of Open Data Institute.